by way of introduction, I don't know who's used this type of meeting before or not. Down in your lower left-hand corner, there should be a strip of different menus of things to see. One is mute, stop video. There's a participants and share screen. If you're like me and have a lot of noisy background or expecting a phone call or anything, we'd invite you to mute yourself so that we can hear Pat as clearly as possible. And we
I don't have that on mine.
Okay. And if you
It
want,
should be in the left-hand corner.
Left-hand corner.
If you put your arrow on it, you know, kind of like just scroll your arrow down there, they'll show up.
Okay.
It's not down there automatically, but if you kind of go down in the left-hand corner just with your mouse arrow, it should show up.
No, and if not, I can mute you too, Joanne, if you want that and take care of that for you.
Would you?
Okay. So, but I won't do that without your permission to do things like that. If you would like to participate or have a comment, just get your hand in the air, just like in school, raising your hand, and then Pat will acknowledge you. At some point, I'll direct your attention to the upper right-hand corner of your screen, and it should say either speaker view or gallery view. If you click on that, you'll see that it changes. And then that way you can see everybody who's here, or you can see the person who's going to be speaking with the green triangle around. Joanne, do you have?
I like that. I got it, yeah.
So then that way you can kind of feel like you're all part of this. At some point, we'll put Pat as the main speaker so we can all see her to do that. Other than that, do I have everybody's permission to record this session? Then that way, maybe in the future we can use this same program. It probably won't be used today, but just so we can experiment. If you have that, can you just wave to have your permission? Okay. And then last but not least, take a look at yourself. Try to get your screen so that everybody can see you, or with backlighting. And Wayne, yeah, if you lean forward, we can see your face better. I don't know if there's a light you can turn on to help with that or not, but Sandy's got a great, you must be a pro at this, having good front light with that, and Ron's got some really nice front light there, but this is your chance to do that.
Can I just insert that this glow over here on my head, that's not my halo. That's just, it's just the overhead light.
Okay, so with that, I'll pass it over to Pat to have us navigate change.
And we are going to be navigating this morning because this is somewhat new to all of us. I don't know how many people here have had the opportunity to do something via Zoom before, but I'm happy to have you explore this with me and explore change. Lately, there's been a lot of changes. One of the things that's been going through my head is a line from Bob Dylan's song, "The Times They Are A-Changing." And indeed, they have changed in a big way in the last few months. I'd like you to, before I forget, we have a scheduled break, and I don't know if we'll need it or not. So at some point when it comes to be the time when it was scheduled, I'll just ask if people want to take a short break. I'd like you to begin by introducing yourself and share something in your life that that has changed, and it can be recent, or if we want to stick with the coronavirus and say, how has this affected your life? And maybe say, what's been the easiest part of that change, and what's been a difficult part of that? And I guess I need to see the gallery, right? There we go. So if you want to raise your hand, and this will be popcorn style, whoever wants to go first, or feels moved to go first. Wayne.
As far as change goes, as of in August, I was engaged, and that came to an abrupt end. And from an ease standpoint, there is no ease to that. When you're expecting to be married and have a lifelong relationship, there's no easy part to that. I guess if there is anything easy, I don't have to answer the phone at 6 o'clock in the morning, or I don't have to worry about being at someone's house. So that might be the easy part. But as far as this virus goes, this is very difficult. We were joking about the hair, but that's how I make money. And right now I'm told by the state of Indiana, I can't even make money, or I risk losing my license. So that's a very difficult thing to take on. So,
So some real dramatic changes for you, Wayne.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'd seen someone else raise their hand, but I don't know who it was. Oh, Ron.
This is Ron. Yes, actually, my routines really haven't changed a lot because since I've been retired, I don't have serious commitments to be any place else other than, home and going for walks in the woods. But the one thing I do celebrate right now is really the change of the season, and that is in springtime. One of my great joys is doing gardening, so I've been working on starting seedlings. And again, the concept of the symbolism of putting seeds in the ground and hoping for their flowering and their maturity and their growth, and then bearing fruits and beauty in terms of flowers go, is a real celebration for me. So I enjoy every season, but the spring is a time of renewal and a deep reflection. So that's part of the change, is just seeing the days get longer and warmer, and watching the grass turn green and the trees starting to bud. So I celebrate that with gratitude.
Well, good, thank you. And I think there's a whole lot of people celebrating the springtime with you. So thank you, Ron. Who else wants to raise their hand? Joanne.
Well, I think the thing that's been, for me, the change is realizing that I'm old.
Oh.
and dealing with some of the hard part is dealing with some of the aches and pains that come with being old. And then when people say, when you're in a store or something before this, if people say, can I help you? And I think, do I look that old? But anyway, the other parts of it I really like. I have, because of some of the aches and pains, I've had to stop working at the library, which I loved. And so I'm not doing that, but I'm really, actually, I feel guilty saying this, but this quarantine thing, I have loved. I love being home. I love being able to read without feeling like I should be doing something else. I have cleaned out immense number of cupboards. So the changes, part of it is good and part of it is not so good, but I'm here to learn how to deal with it.
Good. I think there's parts that all of us enjoy about it, even though it has its own challenges. So thank you, Joanne. Sister Marla.
I think I could follow on Joanne's thoughts. I have just really treasured this so-called locked-in time or space. I've never been in one building in years and years, I'm sure. I really enjoyed the outdoors. We've gone hiking out in some parks, and we've gone, when I say we, I mean square meter who I live with here, and doing things that I sometimes have always pushed off to the side. And so some of my to-do lists are being addressed, and that feels really good. and I have quite a, I think I could take another 2 months real easily without any struggle at all, because it just feels like, yeah, you don't, just the fact that I'm taking this program here, I wouldn't have to, but I really want to, and Pat does wonderful work with her programs and all that, and I just thought, I'm going to treat myself to this without any feeling of maybe I should get something else taken care of. So it's all that kind of switching. But I think the best part of it all is more time just to ponder. You know, what are we being called to be somewhat different from maybe some things that are no longer that helpful for Mother Earth? What should that look like in my space here? Like Ron, I love to garden, so I'm getting real antsy to get out there and start doing some of that. But I'm just thinking in the bigger picture, what would help make a healthier world by what I'm doing and not doing. And so that's a big question that I'm pondering a lot. Been watching some other programs that I think might help give me some insights.
So having a little more leisure to take advantage of some things that you would like to participate in that you might not have had the time or the opportunity to do so before.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Who would like to go next? I suppose I could share a change, huh? Before coming to Marywood, I was caregiver for my mom, and I'm now staying in what was my parents' home. And 4 years ago, this might seem trivial, but I had bought paint to redo the kitchen. And so a couple weeks ago, I thought, well, maybe it's time to paint the kitchen. And I think part of that, so it's in process, but part of it is realizing that it sort of still feels like my parents' home. And by painting it and changing a couple things, it feels a little bit more like the place where I'm living. It kind of, I'd like it to look more like this, or I'd like to put this here or put that there. So it just feels a little more settling to me to be in the house when I get something repainted and reorganized a bit. And speaking of homes, I'm intrigued somewhat by the commercial. I think it's for Lincoln's. It says, more than ever, your home is your sanctuary now. And when I reflect on that, I think, oh, a sanctuary is a place of refuge, a place of protection. But there's also that meaning of, in a temple or in a church, there's usually a sanctuary area, which is considered the more sacred area. And so can I become more aware of my home or where I'm living as a sanctuary, a sacred place? So that's what's kind of some of what's going through my head at this time. Grant.
Can unmute my own audio.
Yeah, you
well, I'm just kind of comparing now to where I was last year in Southwest Iowa, town living, compared to being out in the North Woods on 3 acres of land. But I get the honor of sharing my sanctuary home with my wife and 2 daughters of 8 and 5. A change I've had to become not only dad, but a teacher, which is new, and I'm loving it a lot. And it's kind of fun, 3rd grade assignments of all the little things you can learn in a nice, simple way. A lot different than theology books I read. But we celebrated Earth Day by going on a scavenger hunt on our 3 acres of land. And one was to find the biggest around tree that we have, the biggest in diameter. And then we each got to go and look through the woods for the biggest tree. Another was find a tree that's as tall as you are without going over or under. One was to find a birch tree. We have a lot of dead birches, but not many there. And this was all kind of just a fun way to run around our area. We've been having campfires. And the nice thing is compared to camping is we could run in the house and grab the hot dog roasting stick that we forgot as compared to camping. So we've been enjoying the outdoors, anything to get them out. Hi, Sister Mary Ellen is joining us. So.
Well, thank you, Grant. Lots of opportunities, and I'm glad you're enjoying time with your family and discovering. I like your Earth Day activity. Let's see, Sister Elizabeth or Sister Mary Ellen, would you like to share any recent change in your life and what was easy about that? What was hard about that?
Recent change in my life is doing things by Zoom, virtual instead of in person. That's been a challenge, I will admit it, but I enjoy it when I get it.
And my recent change is as of the beginning of September, I just moved up here to the North Woods, and it's a whole new world. And what's been good about it is all the wonderful new people I've met and the gorgeous scenery. What's been hard is letting go of what I had been used to. People, relationships, the work. And it's challenging to move, to be so deeply rooted and then to pull up your roots and then reroot yourself. It's challenging, but it's also a gift.
Yeah, okay. And that's part of what we'll explore today is that there are challenges with change, but there are also gifts and opportunities. Sandy or Kathy, would you like to share something? Okay, Sandy.
Good morning. Just what I'm sorry, the last sister had said about moving. I recently moved away from the Northwoods due to some changes in life circumstance. And it's been pretty difficult because, as you said too, that, you know, moving away from things you're used to, from people you love, just a whole new change has been pretty difficult, but there's a lot of blessings with it too. I'm closer to one of my sons and daughter-in-law, and due to this virus, my youngest son, who is 30, his job, he couldn't be in the office, so he's actually working remotely down by me. So I get time with him, and I'm hoping to, through this time together, we get to know each other a little bit more as adults. Last time we lived together, he was in high school, and you know, once he left for college, that was the last time we lived together. So there are some good things also.
When you say that, Sandy, I think both the difficult things and the good things, there's an adjustment to both of them, isn't there?
There is.
Yeah. Kathy, did you have any you wanted to share with us about changes in your life? And maybe not. Okay. Well, I thought today that's what we want to explore is changes, how they affect our lives, and how we navigate them. And then this morning I was thinking a bit more about navigating, and I think of being in a canoe and kind of steering and making your way around things or through things. And so how do changes affect us positively? How do they affect us negatively? And what are the spiritual dimensions of change as well? I'd like to begin with a short prayer. And I guess I thought originally we could pray it together, but Grant has told me that to have everyone speak together doesn't really work very well. So is there anyone who would like to volunteer to read the prayer? Grant is going to put it up on the screen. And since I can't see all of you, I think perhaps I'll read it if that's okay. Loving Father, everything is changing around me, my life, my circumstances, and even the world. Lord, help me to not fear this change. Rather, may I embrace it as I embrace you daily. Give me strength to rise above every situation and overcome the darkness. Shower me with light in the midst of the darkness. But most of all, give me peace within the chaos. Changes baffle me at times, Lord. Let me be still and remember you are in charge and your plans for me are good. Through your grace, I will trust that things will work out according to your will and plan for my life. So I think when we, does anyone want to share any reflection on that or response to that prayer? Can people still hear me? Okay. So I want to say that sometimes we think change comes up like it is sometimes unexpected, but change is part of life, and actually change is life. All living things grow. And Ron, you were talking about working in the garden and working outside, and Sister Marla was. And so sometimes we put in seeds, sometimes, and they become a seedling, or sometimes we put in seedlings, and then pretty soon we have shoots, and we might get buds, then we'll get flowers, and then eventually, if it's a vegetable or a fruit, it bears some fruit. And we also, as human beings, change. There's just natural changes, stages that we grow through. I had a little great niece born in February, was able to see some pictures of her the other day and just how she's grown. She's smiling now. So change is just part of life. It's inevitable. But the question is, when it says change choices, it's like, how do we respond to that change? What kinds of feeling responses do we have to change? And there can be all kinds of responses. There is upheaval, confusion, sometimes distress or anxiety, maybe fear, a sense of loss. But change can also bring joy, excitement, freshness, anticipation, some new energy. And sometimes we discover those as we live through that change. Jim Clemmer, who is a businessman, has talked about, we may not have a choice about change, but we have a choice about how we respond to it. And I think how we respond to change, he talks about being navigators, survivors, or victims. And how we respond might be influenced by our values, by our beliefs, by our cultural background, our family of origin, our personality. There can be all kinds of factors in terms of how we respond. And I think that it also, how we respond might be determined by the particular situation. So the first response, he says, is we can be a navigator. And, a navigator. And this means that we become proactive. It's a very powerful response to change. And how do we ask ourselves, how do we capitalize on these changes? How do we make the best out of a bad situation? We look for the good, we look for the blessing, we look for the opportunity. Maybe it involves some brainstorming. We might ask, how can this change lead to something better? What are the possibilities here? I remember once I was making a birthday cake for my mom, and I'd never made that particular cake before, and it completely flopped. I couldn't get it to come out of the pan for love nor money. And finally, I got it out in all these little bits and pieces, and I'm trying to patch it together. And I thought, oh boy, this is going to take a lot of frosting. Well, one of my sisters said, well, how about if we make a trifle? And I said, what's a trifle? So she explained that, and we made a trifle. And then people wanted the recipes to the trifle, but we just kind of had put it together. But it turned out, I think, better than the cake would have been. Socrates said, the secret to change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new. And if I'm wondering if someone has an example of being a navigator through change, of making the best out of a bad situation, or saying, what are the possibilities here? Does anyone have an example that they can think of, other than maybe a cake that flopped? Okay, Sister Marla.
I was thinking of just a very simple thing this morning. I knew I wanted to get something, I needed to get it so it could go in the mail today. And I knew that I wanted to watch this, be part of this program this Friday. So I thought last night, the only way I can navigate it, because I was too tired to do it last night, was I just need to get up earlier, change a couple of my usual morning things, and take care of that. And then I can move ahead with what I need or want to do down the line, which involved getting some information to somebody out of the state. And so I needed to, and I knew that just doing it over the internet wouldn't take care of it. So I was kind of navigating a change by just a change of schedule, making adjustments, give myself enough time so that I can move ahead, rather than put it off for another week or something and then not attend to some other people's needs.
Thank you.
Simple navigator in a little tiny canoe.
Thank you. Anyone else? I can't see all of you right now, so you know, if someone else wants to jump in. Well, another mode that Clemmer speaks about is the survivor mode. We get by, and you know, it's a little bit of navigator, a little bit of victim in there, but survivor, and that's mostly we're kind of sitting on the fence. We're waiting to see what's going to happen, and sometimes we're waiting for someone else to do something. It can be wise to wait, and because let's gather some more information, let's do a little more research. And probably at this time with COVID-19, there's a lot of, well, we have to wait and see what's going to happen. There's a lot of waiting involved, looking for more research, and some of the questions that people have can't be answered until there's more research, till we discover more. So that makes it a little bit harder to wait and see when you don't know how long it's going to take. I'm wondering if someone has an example of surviving, waiting to see what's going to happen, and how that turned out in a situation of change. Does anyone have an example that they might share?
If I could jump in here, I see that word and that description, let's wait and see what happens, and I think I could have my name on it as the definition. Just to, I don't know if I like the idea of survivor, but just to kind of sit back, make sure all the information is gathered, have a plan of action, thought through first, and in some ways that's kind of a hold on to safety and security type mindset, as to compare to just let's just jump into the clouds and see what God has in store for us. So I like that description. Let's wait and see what happens. And in some ways, it's very spiritual, of just sitting back and taking it in. but then other ways, you might miss the boat on opportunities.
And that's true. Sometimes it's hard to know how long to wait, right? Anyone else? Joanne?
I've done that with my kids in in my older age. I've learned that instead of jumping in and trying to fix things for them, that if you wait and see, it's just amazing what happens, what they're capable of doing, and what and sometimes the things that look like really hard things that you don't want them to have to go through. On the other side of that, when they've gone through it, they have learned so much and learned so many good lessons. And so I'm gradually learning how to just sit back and wait and see what happens. And it really is a very peaceful place to be. So I like that. Thanks.
No, thank you, Joanne. Thank you. And I hear in there a sense of surrender too. It's like trusting them.
Right, exactly.
And
they love it.
Oh, they love it. Good. I think I heard Ron's voice, maybe.
Yes, I think part of the issue of being a survivor and waiting to see what happens really is an issue of faith. I heard a very inspirational talk a couple of years ago by a woman named Allison Levine, who actually led the first United States or American Everest expedition of all women. And she does a great presentation where she talks about sometimes to go up, you have to go down. And she describes how the people who climb Mount Everest, go from base camp to Camp 1, and they spend the night there and then go back to base camp again and kind of find their way leapfrogging up the mountain by going up and going down, partly to acclimatize to attitude and partly to shuffle their gear. But at any rate, their expedition, the first women's expedition to Mount Everest of all Americans, made it to about 800 feet below the summit. And on the day that they were going to do the summit, a big storm came in as they were on the route. And basically their choice was to bivouac or sort of hunker in at 800 feet below the summit or probably die. So one of the comments she made is that getting to the summit was optional, but getting off the mountain was, in her mind, not optional. So they basically had a dig snow caves or bivouac for the night, 800 feet below the summit, and survived. And one of the wisdoms that she shared, and it's a wisdom that I've filed in my mind, is that storms don't last. So in a way, getting through coronavirus right now, we could consider ourselves being at 800 feet below the summit of Mount Everest. But sometimes the idea of just hunkering down and having faith that storms don't last helps us survive some of that, some of the conflict in our lives and the things that we perceive as sort of bad karma. So I think to live with faith that things will change, and actually that's what your talk is about today, is change, but also live with the concept of gratitude. The gratitude, maybe in the case of Allison Levine and her teammates on Mount Everest, was that the gratitude was that they survived the mountain, and she went back to have a successful Mount Everest expedition later on. But she shares a lot of wisdoms in the exploration of some of her adventures that apply to our lives. And one that I think that applies to our life that I always reflect on is that storms don't last. And it's important to keep that in our minds and in our hearts and be driven by faith that storms don't last.
Thank you very much for sharing that very powerful one-line sentence of wisdom, or one-line phrase of wisdom, Ron, that storms don't last. And it's difficult when the storm is going on or when you're in the midst of the storm to sometimes believe that, because we feel threatened or afraid or whatever, but that the storm will not last. So thank you. Anyone else? Otherwise, we'll take a brief look at, Clemmer says that another response is the victim response, and that's the most powerless response, kind of, as he says, a reactive response. And, You know, they're doing it again. Or sometimes, why does this always happen to me or to us? What does the universe have against me? Or sometimes people might even think, what does God have against me? There's, it's kind of, he calls it blame storming. It's like somehow somebody else is doing this to me. And I don't know if anyone has an example that they want to share, but I think sometimes we just feel helpless, defeated, maybe a bit bitter. Someone or the universe or life is out to get us, and that is very powerless. It takes away our power. So I think if we can begin to see that there are other ways to respond to change. I'm wondering if anyone, and I think, Grant, we can take this graphic off the screen and we'll just all look at each other for a while. Thank you. And there you all go there. Modes in response to, oops. Can you hear me? It says, okay. It said that I was muted by the host, and I was gonna say, but do you hear, or do you know of any other responses to change? Or do you recognize in yourself kind of like a preference in terms of which mode you respond in? It's like we might have a predominant mode, but how we respond might also depend on the situation we're in, the skills that we have, the knowledge. Mary Ellen, Sister Mary Ellen.
I keep thinking actually in terms of especially the whatever you call it, the navigating mode.
Mm-hmm.
It's learning. I think the trick is to learn to think out of the box as we look at each other in boxes here. But that I know I get caught in, well, this is the way it's done. This is the way I've always done. This is the way everybody does it. And then all of a sudden somebody will say, well, why don't we do it this way? You know, and it's like, oh, you know, it's like a light goes on. But I think you can teach yourself to get in the habit of doing that. I remember when we were growing up in my family, my father was very good at teaching us. And he used to sit around the dinner table and he used to take something like a cup. And he would say, okay, what are the uses for this cup? And everybody had to say a different use. And you'd keep going around the table until there weren't any more ideas. Or he'd take a piece of paper or just some simple thing. And I think it taught us to look outside the box and look at other ways of doing things. And that was really valuable.
Thank you. Yeah. I think one of the things that I say to myself sometimes in a situation, I might find myself getting aggravated or angry. And then I say, wait a minute, stop. Don't get angry, get creative. Get creative. And how, you know, what are the possibilities here? Sister Marla, I think I saw your hand.
I was sitting here and then I thought I've seen that same line of participants here on my screen, but I haven't seen the other ones for a while. And then I thought, well, what can I do? So then I thought, well, let me just try a couple things. So I saw an arrow and all of a sudden I found out that the people that were missing on my screen for a while, all of a sudden they popped up instead of those that were there with me for the last couple minutes. And then I thought, okay, maybe I can go up in the upper right-hand corner and there's that box up there that has, you know, speaker, and it has another box where you got everybody and all that. So I thought, well, I'm going to click on that and see what else can happen while the conversation is still going on and I'm still being attentive. But I thought I want to explore my space more. So that's what I was kind of doing, maybe with the thought the next time I do a program, I got some things I can do too. But it was just, again, that creativity. If I would have just stayed here and thought, oh, well, it's just too bad. I haven't seen, you know, Mary Ellen for a while, and I wonder if she's okay or did she pop out or, you know, whatever. But instead, I can really take responsibility for my own questions more on a screen, maybe more than when I was in a group. But anyway, it's kind of fascinating. that's not quite what you were thinking maybe, but I thought it was a form of creativity.
Oh yeah, no. I thought, how can I see these people? And I couldn't quite figure it out. But I liked what Grant had said earlier about Earth Day. They went exploring, and sometimes I think in situations of change, we have to explore what are the possibilities. What if people always say to me with the computer, well, just, you can't hurt it. And I think, but I sometimes I end up someplace and I don't even know how I got there and how do I get out of it. But I think part of when we look at change is to not be afraid to explore, to try something and say, well, this is an adventure and maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. Grant.
I guess thinking back to that graphic we have of victim, survivor, and excel, I just think of different situations in my life. I said I seem to be in that center one, but I can think of as a person that's drawn to pastoral work, caregiving. We notice the bottom one of the survivor modes, and it's like, how can we help? How can we help our neighbor to lift them up in those things? And sometimes it's a challenge. Sometimes it's frustrating. It's like, well, can't you see? Just try looking outside of the box. You can do it. I mean, it's there in front of you. But then when those clouds of change are around you, or moments of despair, or the shadow side, or however it's labeled, it's really hard. And I think all of us bounce up and down that chart depending on the circumstances and everything.
Mm-hmm. Joanne.
This is a bit off the subject, but I wanted to tell Grant that a fun thing to do with your kids, if you can get hold of a stethoscope, you can take it out and put it up against the trees, and you can listen to the life that's going on inside the trees. And it's really fun to do with kids. Mm-hmm. So that was off the subject. I wanted to tell Grant that when he was talking about taking his kids out to the woods.
Sandy. Grant, can you unmute Sandy?
Okay, I just did, I think. Okay. Sometimes my confusion in these is when to switch from the survivor response to the navigator response, because I tend to pray about it and, what should I do? And then I really try hard to be patient, because I'm pretty much where I'm a human doer, and I know I'm through this phase of our life. I need to just be a human being and be. So it's hard for me to know when to go between the survivor response to the navigator response and actually do something. Because many times I've been to the navigator and first, and I'm learning as I get older, just more of being in the survival response mode. Sometimes it's just hard for me to know when to go back to the navigator response now, because I found that sometimes the navigator response is what I've done more in the past, and I'm trying to just kind of like be a human being and prayerfully make some decisions. So I'm trying to learn to do that.
I think I'm hearing you suggest, Sandy, that there can be a blend of these modes, or sometimes in response to something we act partly in one mode, but then we move to another mode.
Yes, and sometimes it's knowing, the trick is knowing, or the voice even is knowing when to do that, when to move from one mode to the other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What you're saying, Sandy, makes me think of, I think it was St. Ignatius, the founder of the Jesuits, who said, pray as if everything depended on God and act as if everything depended on you. And I kind of like that. You do both. God's in charge, but you also have your part to play too.
Okay, thank you.
Sister Marla, did you have something to add, or? Okay.
No, actually, I was sitting here and I kicked the table a little bit, and it made
Oh,
the
okay.
sound to think it was I was wanting to speak, and I no move on.
Okay. Your box lit up, so I thought, oh,
My
okay.
creativity overabounded.
I guess I'm muted. Okay, I'm unmuted now. Can you hear me?
Yep. Mhm.
Okay. So first off, I think we're all on our own journeys and need to figure out, how to deal with change and go from survivor to navigator, in our own ways. But the things that have worked or that are working for me that I really reflect on every day. In fact, I start the day by first off, or one of the first things that I do is always reflect on the 4 agreements. And one of the 4 agreements is to not to take things personally. Now, it's pretty hard to not take some things personally on occasion. But the other concept that I try to reflect on every day is that of gratitude. And even some things that I perceive that maybe aren't so good, like if my knee is stiff and hurts today, that I reflect on that maybe that's, how can I turn that into gratitude that my knee is sore today? So, and again, we're all on our own journeys with that, but I find with myself to not take things personally and live in gratitude really helps me stay more in a navigator mode. The other part of the journey is really, I sort of look forward to change and embrace change. And usually chaos does precede change. In fact, one of the things that I think that could be powerful about the coronavirus epidemic currently is that it helps us all reflect on that we're all a lot more alike than different, and we're all connected, and we're all equally vulnerable. It really doesn't make a lot of difference if you're rich or poor, or live in New York or live in Kansas. That there are some differences in terms of ability to access resources. Like right now, more people aren't surviving that are probably have less access to healthcare, and rural places like where we live is perhaps privileged because we don't have as much population density and aren't as close to each other. Plus, the contagiousness of the virus, hasn't maybe gotten to where we live yet. But the reality is we all have the same vulnerability. And when we recognize that we're all a lot more alike than different, that I think that it helps build community and connects us as people. So again, I think we're all on our own journey and do our own reflections. But for me, what helps is to try to not take things personally, which is one of the 4 agreements. And the other thing is to live in gratitude and really embrace change as an opportunity for growth through chaos. One example I heard of that was how the caterpillar turns into the butterfly when the cocoon is in basically a mushy mess. The butterfly is what emerges on the other end. So hopefully we'll all be butterflies. And I would like to have optimism that the world's going to be a better place when we get to the other side of this epidemic.
Thank you very much for mentioning the gratitude, Ron, because I do think that's key. I think gratitude opens us up to possibilities. Gratitude enables us to look beyond the box that we're maybe move on a bit now, but I thank you very much for your responses. And I think to recognize, as Clemmer said, that we have a choice about how we respond to changes, to be aware of perhaps the mode that we're most comfortable with, and maybe there's a mode that we're striving for, maybe we're stuck someplace, but to be aware of that and to know that we have some choices, because sometimes change can make us feel like, we are powerless, there's nothing we can do, but there's always something. We're going to look at the process of change, and I want to give credit to Sister Marla for this schema, or however you want to call it. And so when we to look at change, to know that it is a process, and I think that that's part of what we've been sharing, or what I've been hearing from you. So when we look at change, which is just part of life, one of the first things, and I guess if we can have just that change graphic for a moment, Grant.
Yes.
There we go. And so you're going to see that there's some parts to it, and kind of one part leads to another perhaps, but things can, it doesn't always go in a certain order. You can go back and forth. So we begin saying there's change. Well, the first part about change is there's some source of change. And when we look at the source of change, there we go. And for whatever reason, it was the same size as the one that said change, but it just didn't come out fully on the screen. But when we look at a source of change, there can be three types of change. There's a developmental transition. I mentioned my little niece, Joanne, mentioned some changes that she's experiencing that are just part of life, part of growing. And so I think for a moment, just think of some way in which maybe you have changed developmentally, there's physically, and maybe it seems like you're not developing, like you're regressing, but some way in which you've changed physically in perhaps say the last 3 years. And then think of some way in which you've changed spiritually or socially in the last 3 years. A second type of change can be an intrusive event, a jarring experience. It seems like it came out of nowhere. It came suddenly. And that can happen in many forms. It might be something irreversible, unchangeable. And I think if we can see everyone again for a moment, Grant. I forgot how Sister Marla got to everyone. But if you could just call out some jarring experiences that perhaps you have experienced, or maybe someone else who's experienced. I'm thinking of not being able to work right now, Wayne. That I would think is probably a jarring experience for you. Would you like to say anything more about that? Okay. Grant, can you unmute Wayne?
Are we there?
There we go. Yep. I'm sorry, Wayne. Okay.
That's okay. It is a very jarring experience because I'm used to creating my own business. I open the doors, I close the doors. I apologize for that.
It's okay.
Another barber, as a matter of fact.
Oh.
And then now I'm being told that I have to close my doors and they'll suspend my license if I open my doors. And so in life, we're given parameters. And this is a parameter that doesn't make a whole lot of sense in my mind. And where I understand for the greater good, the idea that we don't want to affect another person, but yet my life is completely, I can tell you physically, I'm going through, it's odd to sit on the couch all day. It's odd to not be able to go to a funeral. In the course of, from the course of the last 5 weeks, I was told I couldn't work. So I have no income. So if I don't cut somebody's hair, I don't have anybody giving me cash. And I don't have any way, like a restaurant can go from table service to they can at least have carry out so they have some sort of income coming in. And then throw on top of that, our wonderful government with all its red tape. Those are, you can hear about all the grant and aid. It doesn't exist for a little business like mine. So those things are hard, knowing that I normally create my own. You were talking about navigator versus survivor. At this point, I'm thrown into survivor mode for no other reason. So that change is very difficult because I would rather be the navigator. As Sandy said, I would rather hit it straight on and head on make adjustments on my own, as being told to, well, you just got to kind of sit back and wait. So that's a jarring change.
It's like your hands are tied.
Hands, feet, I feel like my neck is tight at times.
Okay. I mean, we're smiling, but it's not funny for you. Okay.
We'll get through it though.
Yeah. Any other jarring experiences? I think perhaps the COVID-19 pandemic is a jarring experience for our whole country. It's like as individuals, but also as a country, but also as a world. It's changed so many things. So I think you've probably all had experienced some type of jarring experience in your life. Did you want to say something, Mary Ellen?
No.
Okay. Oh, Joanne.
Well, about, I guess it was 2 years ago or maybe 3, our daughter developed cancer and she's young, she's in her 40s. And that was a huge jarring experience for us. I mean, she's okay now, but she went through a horrible time of surgeries, major surgeries where she had 2 world-renowned neurosurgeons working on her. And I am just so grateful that she's okay now, but it was a terrible time for all of us, especially for her, but for us to realize that can happen and you don't expect it, so that was very jarring to us. And we lived through it. We went down and stayed with her for a long time, and that was, that was the good part of it, was that we got to be there. We got to live with her for a few months and take care of her, and that was wonderful. And but the whole thing of realizing that we are not invincible, this can happen to all of us. So that probably was a really jarring experience for us.
I just, as you were speaking, I thought, I guess I've been thinking of these jarring experiences as negative, but it also might be a positive experience that can be somewhat jarring. And I think of people who have their first child, and you might have, and I'm not a parent, so some of you who are parents, but it's like, it's something that you look forward to, and yet there's also, I'm assuming there's an adjustment. Am I correct in that?
Yes.
Joanne, do you want to say something to that?
Having had 5 children, there's lots of adjustments.
So you've had at least 5 jarring experiences, huh?
Yeah. But they were, in hindsight, they were all wonderful, and they still are, so I'm grateful.
Okay, good. I think a third change that might occur is what can be called an internal uprising, and it might be that there's some just vague sense of restlessness inside someone. It might be stress that causes it, or maybe some burnout, but there's an inner voice inside of us desperately trying to tell us something, like pay attention, listen up. And maybe if someone has an addiction, that the voice of the addiction has grown too loud. Maybe something that we believed in no longer holds true, and we have to change. There's a change that's being called for. One of the changes in my life was that my bachelor's degree was in home economics education, and I was working for the University of Wisconsin Extension Service. And at some point, you had to go back and get a master's degree, and I was at that point. And so people kept suggesting schools to me, and they kept suggesting, well, think about studying or, looking at a degree in this, or, they're not expert or expertise in this. And I was just like, and I had requested a leave of absence and all that. And so finally I said, you have to decide because you have to apply to these schools. So I sat down at my kitchen table one night and said, okay, you're going to look through the catalogs, you're going to make a decision and start applying to schools. And after I looked through the last catalog, I closed it and I pushed it away. And I said out loud, who are you trying to kid? You don't want to study home economics. You want to study theology. And I was like, I do? And I was so surprised because I wasn't paying much attention or very much aware of what was, rising up inside of me, what was going on inside of me. So does anyone have another example of, something internal that moved you towards some change in your life? Grant. Oh. Waved. I don't know.
I'm just reflecting on the relationship between your internal voice and the external things that happen and how that changes. For example, if you sense some anxiety or worry in you, and then the self-dialogue comes in, I know I shouldn't be anxious, just relax. And then a lot of times you get even more anxious about the situation. And then I just go to think of the whole idea of being able to control it or accepting it and moving on. And Ron gave us some strategies before about what he uses, and the fact that reality is this is how you're feeling, even if you're supposed to think that way or if others think you're supposed to think that way. That's just kind of what's rumbling on inside there.
I know a number of people. Oh, Sister Marla.
I was thinking of another form of a jarring experience. It's like being in a car accident. I had that experience about a year and a half ago. And I was doing some reflecting on that just more recently. And when I think about it, many times what happens with those jarring experiences, they stun a person to the point where it's hard to think well, it's hard to do what you normally do because you're so stunned, and it doesn't go over, it doesn't leave a person just overnight. And I think, the people around you are such great help in all different kinds of ways, but it's what shall I say, there's so many pieces to the puzzle that can change a person almost right on the spot like that, and I think it almost takes a fair amount of time in my situation, at least, to reflect on it enough and try not to bury it. But what are the gifts that have come out of it? What treasures do I have that I often take for granted in the line of people, in the line of timing, in the line of even how I drive. When I'm more careful, all of those kind of things kind of surround it, and financial loss, and there's just all those myriad parts of it all. But I always think, the gifts that also surround it, and then takes a person to a much deeper level than I ever had getting into a car since. On the road is that. How do other people impact me in that whole process? So just a couple of things that go through my mind as I consider the implications of jarring experiences. Many or most, I think, in my life have taken me to a much deeper level than I probably would have ever gone before.
So I hear you saying that for a jarring experience, there's some really profound effects that we may not notice immediately following that experience, but they emerge at later times. And maybe what part of that is that we can go back to that experience and continue to reflect on it and learn from it.
Thank you.
No, thank you. I think another, like maybe, I don't know if it's an internal uprising or if it's just part of natural development or transitions, but sometimes people go through a midlife crisis. And a book that I've read recently, and I'm going to hold it up for a second. Of course, it's backwards, so I don't know how to make it right, but it's by Sue Monk Kidd, and it's called When the Heart Waits. And I just found it to be such an excellent, excellent book. You know, she went through a midlife crisis, but there's so much wisdom that she shares in the book that I think applies also to other changes in someone's life. Any other maybe internal, you know, I say uprising, it sounds like it's rather quick and violent, but any other like internal transformations that people have sensed in their lives? I think one of the statements that I read that says, while a crisis or a change is a summons to transformation, it is also an advent of an entanglement of feelings, and I think an entanglement of questions also. What kinds of feeling responses do you have to changes? And I'm sure that the feeling depends on the particular change, but what are some feeling responses that we have? Like I will admit to a little nervousness yesterday and this morning thinking, oh God, not done this before. So I prayed about this morning.
For me, a lot of times change brings feelings of excitement, anticipation, new experiences, new relationships. And again, my family moved around a lot as I was growing up, and every time we moved, my parents would frame it as a new idea, a new adventure, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I've come to look forward to changes for that reason.
Grant.
I guess I get the biblical image of Peter trying to walk on the water, that yes, this is excitement, it's adventure, I want to do it. But then when I stop to think about it or look down or around, then it's like, oh my gosh, what's happening? I'm sinking.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It just occurred to me, oh, Ron.
Oh, yeah. So I think one of the things that I work on with change is the concept of fear, because again, the things that we don't know, we sometimes can fear. And then the other part of it is, I think that most of us, myself included, don't like to reflect a lot on our vulnerability. But I also think that it's through our vulnerability that we actually really have the growth and can change that fear of change and to embrace it as a gift and to make it better. So I think that, again, anxiety and fear are sort of live in the same room together. And, you know, when we have fear, a lot of times the feelings we have is that of anxiety.
Mm-hmm. I like that image of fear and anxiety living in the same room together. And it just occurs to me that perhaps the feeling responses that we have to change are probably affected by the way, by that if we're more of a survivor mode, a navigator mode, or a victim mode. Because a navigator might get more excited and, oh, here we go, we're off on a new adventure. Whereas someone who's in the survivor mode might be more reluctant, might be more fearful. I'm going to just ask, does anyone feel a need to take a little break? Or, okay, so how about if we take a 5-minute pause? And so if people need to get a drink or do something else, then we'll come back in 5 minutes, okay? And I think Grant is going to put up some lovely scene on the screen that you can look at while you're taking your 5-minute break. Or otherwise, just enjoy looking at each other, who's ever on the screen, okay? Thank you, Grant. It's a nice little park with birds in it.
Ready when you are, Pat.
Okay, I think we'll resume. Welcome back, everyone. I think that as we look at the process of change, the first thing is that there is a source of change. And then the next thing, part of what that does, and we began to touch on that, it calls everything into question. And I'm just wondering, what are some of the questions that arose in your minds when you were change in your life? And I think we can take the graphic off for now, Grant, and then we'll just look at each other. And thank you for the lovely spring scene. Before I get to say that, I remember Ron talking about loving the season of spring at the beginning. And when we think of the types of change, this is just one of those natural developmental transitions. And in about a month, the Northwoods should look like what you had on the screen, or at least I'm hoping it does. So what are some of the questions and some of the experiences in your lives, the experiences of change? What are some of the questions that came up? Or what are some of the questions you hear people asking when they're going through a change? Like, what am I supposed to do now? Where am I supposed to go? Has anyone ever heard someone say, oh, Mary Ellen?
You know, I think of, in terms of, for example, a job change, you know, which I think we've all experienced once or twice in our life. For many of us, what we do is who we are.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm not doing that anymore, who am I? And I think, you know, the exterior, or even like in a family, if you have children, I am a mother, but if my children aren't home anymore, who am I? You know,
Mm-hmm.
if other people or other circumstances define who we are, then we have to reassess that and
Mm-hmm.
look at underneath all that, who am I really? What's left?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that can be a very difficult question to answer.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I know, oh, Sandy. Oh, Grant, can you unmute her?
There we go.
There we go. Okay.
Sometimes too, in the seasons of life, the changes, question that I usually have is, okay, what is my purpose now? You know, for example, you know, when my children were little, my purpose was, you know, I was their mom, you know, the person to teach them and raise them. And, you know, they're all adults now. And, you know, I'm finding now within the change in my life right now that I'm trying to find my purpose. So that's my question with this time of change. I'm looking for my purpose.
For your purpose. And I think another word might be meaning. I was reading something yesterday, and I was talking about the ego and saying the ego wants success. That's what the ego needs, but the soul needs meaning in order to thrive. And I think, yeah, when our meaning, or what is the meaning of my life sometimes? And I sometimes when I reflect on my own life, I think, what would you do if you didn't have keys and you didn't have a title? I mean, once I had the keys to a county courthouse, once I had the keys to the cathedral of the diocese, you know, and I think, what if you didn't have those keys? What if you didn't have that title? What, any other questions that people would say come up when people are in the midst of change or crisis? One might be, how can I help someone else? What can I do for someone else when we look around at what's happening right now? What are some of the spiritual questions that come up? Besides maybe, where is God in all of this? Why is God letting this happen? You know? I remember once one woman, two of her brothers had died, and She was like going, why is God angry at me? Why is God, so she was asking some very difficult questions. Grant.
You got me thinking before when you talked about the ego, and there's like certain situations where it's like I can handle it, so then the questions come to myself, oh, why couldn't you do this better, or why, but then it comes to a tipping point where it's like, maybe this is beyond myself, and then all of a sudden that inner dialogue turns to God, and in the grand scheme of things, maybe take it to God first. Nothing's too big or too small for God, but yet the ego goes in thinking, God doesn't need time or doesn't have time to work on this little part. But where's that tipping point where it goes from self to God instead of God at all times?
And so in this process of change, the questions are important, and sometimes the questions are frightening and they're difficult. Sometimes we need to allow other people to ask us questions. And again, part of that might be the, I forget which mode now I'm like going, where you're sitting on the fence, the survivor mode is like part of it. You have to sit with the questions. You have to wait until the answer comes. And sometimes when someone else asks us a question, when they're going through a change, we want to answer their question, or maybe we want to mitigate their discomfort. But sometimes we have to allow them to just speak their questions and listen to them. And again, the questions that we ask might be influenced by the mode of operation, whether we're acting as a survivor, a navigator, a victim. So become aware, listen to the questions that you ask. The next part of the change process is turning to resources, and that might help with answering some of the questions or coming up with a solution to whatever. So the resources, you might be, what do I need? What information do I need? Where do I get it? What's been helpful to me in the past? What would be helpful to me right now? So begin to turn to resources. I'm going to go back to, well, I guess I can see everyone now, but I'm going to ask, what has been helpful to you in the past when you have worked through or lived through a change? What kinds of things in terms of resources, or who has been helpful to you in the past? So, Joanne?
No, I'm trying to get the pictures of everybody. Sorry. Well,
Okay.
I think one of the resources for me that in the past has been spiritual direction, has really helped me a lot over many, many years. So that would be probably one of my best resources. And then reading, there's all kinds of really good books that are resources. So,
Okay. Mary Ellen or Elizabeth, or oops.
I was just going to say big changes. I was going to say having a spiritual director, and then Joanne said it.
Oh, okay.
That's been very significant in my life.
Okay. So we got two. Okay, go ahead.
I was just going to say too, my instinct would be to go to someone who's been there before. Someone who has had that experience and maybe can say to me, this is how I got through it. Can you help me?
And so we do have a number of support groups that exist. It might be like spiritual director, it might be a counselor, it might be a minister, it might be a friend, but to know who you can turn to. And we might use the expression, what do you hold on to? And maybe who do you hold on to? Or what do you hold on to? Because change sometimes can make us feel, especially I think if it's been a jarring experience, can make us feel like we got tossed overboard. And oh my gosh, I remember once I was on a little sailboat in Barbados, and it tipped over. And so the guy who was steering it said, can you tread water? And I thought, not really, but I guess I'm going to have to. Anyway, he finally got the boat righted and we got back on, but we had to go back into shore. But anyway, he said to me, you didn't even get your hair wet. And I thought, I was not going to get my hair wet. I was not going to go under the water. So it's like when he would have the boat righted, I really hung on to the boat. It might be a song, it might be a poem, maybe some positive message that you hold on to. I like Ron saying the storm won't last. What is something that we can hold on to? It might be a photograph, it might be a belief. Do I believe that the universe is benevolent? Do I believe that God is going to work through all of this? I think some people have mentioned prayer, and there can be a scripture that might work for someone, something that they hold on to. I know that one that I hold on to is Romans 8:28, all things work on to good for those who love God or trust God. We hang on to it. And it might be a symbol, something that speaks to us. Like I know people have their wedding rings. I remember when my dad died, and after his funeral, my mom was sitting at the kitchen table and she just kept turning his wedding ring over and over in her hand. And I thought, what is that all saying to her? So there might be some symbol of change that we hold on to. There's a song that I would like to share with you that I believe some people have hung on to.
God, I look to you, and I won't be overwhelmed. Give me vision to see things like you do. God, I look to you, 'cause you're where my help comes from. Give me wisdom, 'cause you know just what to do. And I will love you days, I'll sing hallelujah forever and all my days.
Someone who certainly holds on to God, looks to God. And there are many ways in which God can come to us. It might be, again, a song, a poem, a book, a saying. And so I'm just wondering if people would share some of the things that you have held on to during a time of change. Wayne.
For whatever reason, well, probably because I was a little kid and there was a summer Bible school that was held on our street every year, and Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, there is nothing I shall want. For whatever reason, that will come into my mind. It won't always be, it will be a comfort, but it won't always necessarily level me. But that's one for me that's come up over the years.
Okay. And sometimes it's just enough to hold on to it, you know. It's like I held on to the boat. It wasn't necessarily real comforting, but I held on. So hold on to it. Okay. Anyone else? Sister Elizabeth.
One for me that I always go back to in times is Psalm 139, knowing that God knew me in the womb and continues to know me and will continue to take care of me. I find that one very comforting.
Okay, thank you. And I think in Psalm 139, you know when I sit, you know when I stand, you know. So okay. Anyone else? I think, did I see your hand, Sandy? Or no, Sister Marla?
I was thinking of what I love to do during those times of pondering and probably that kind of thing is go for a walk in the woods. I find that the woods being a very life-giving. Some people call it forest bathing, but feeling God's presence through all of nature and so forth. And just the stillness and the quiet can mean an awful lot to me as I ponder or, any part of the process that you've shared with us. I find that to be, because we live on a lake, even getting in a boat or whatever, and just walking in the waves, being present that way.
So thank you. So it might be a place that we go to that we hold on to, and then also in that sense of holding on, there's a sense of being held up, that we are being held on to. Grant.
I guess God also speaks to us through people, and I just think of my dad and the phrases he used to say to me, like, you can do it, you're special, and just over and over I can hear his voice, but as God speaks through him for me.
Okay. I'm looking at my watch. I'm going, oh, there's probably much more that you could share in terms of what you hold on to or what holds you up. But I guess we need to look at the next part of that change process. And maybe in that holding on, that enables us to begin to rethink our situation, to begin to rethink about how we see it and clarify what we can do, maybe what we can't do, what do I need to let go of, and what do I need to look forward to. And that might be that process of rethinking, might include speaking with friends, speaking with colleagues, co-workers, if you have a spouse, minister, some maybe specialist or expert, but begin to rethink it. How might I see this differently? We might need, especially in times of change, to change our self-talk And sometimes we say, well, I'm too old to change. Well, maybe we need to say, I choose not to change. Or sometimes people say, well, it's just the way I am, or that's just the way it is. Maybe you say, oh, I'm comfortable with the way I am, or I'm comfortable with the way it is. But I think in rethinking, we need to focus not so much on the past as we need to turn to the future. And when we can begin to see meaning, purpose, and maybe even some mystery in the future that's going to be revealed to it, we can move more easily toward it. There was a little saying that says, the heart weeps for what it has lost, the spirit for what it has found. I just think that's just a neat saying. When the heart weeps for what it has lost, the spirit laughs for what it has found. And so perhaps in that rethinking, to ask ourselves, what newness is God, is life, is holy mystery beckoning me toward? I think most of us may be familiar with the Chinese word for crisis, or the Chinese symbol for crisis. And it's composed of two parts. And one part signifies danger, the other part signifies opportunity. So in any crisis or change, there is something that we leave, there's something that we lose, but there's something that we also step into, that we discover, that we find. And so sometimes we might have to ask ourselves, what do I need to leave behind in order to move into the future? And maybe this change or this crisis is just another name for redirection. I'm going to be moving in another direction. And I think we can ask ourselves in times of change, do I stay more with the danger side, or do I stay more with the opportunity side? And so what opportunities do we see in this coronavirus? Yes, there are dangers, but there are also opportunities. And what are those opportunities that we see? And then the next step, I think I should just add, Elizabeth O'Connor says, those who participate in change must also participate in death. And that doesn't mean a physical death, but it just means maybe I leave behind, I die to thinking about something in a certain way. I begin to see it in a new way. I begin to feel, I lose some old feelings, but I gain some new feelings. And then we come to a new understanding of our situation. And when we can begin to rethink, we can begin to wait, when we can begin to trust, we can begin to hear the voice of God, the voice of life, the voice of mystery in the tumult. God spoke to Job in the whirlwind. I had a nephew who was killed, and so when I hung on to all things work unto good for God, I could begin to come to a new understanding. I could begin to rethink that. And one of my discoveries was that the good did come out of my nephew's death. It's not the death that my family wanted. It's not the good that my family wanted. It's not the good that I thought Peter's life was about. But there was good that came out of it, because he was a donor. And we know that 50 people were helped with what they could harvest. So in small ways and in big ways, we cooperate with the inevitability of change, the changes that happened in our life. I'm wondering if people would share some new understanding that they've come to or arrived at through some change in their life, some new perspective that you have gained. Sandy.
For me, I think because I've always have to reason things. I've always had to understand and reason things. And I think through the changes I've been going through over the last 3 years, I'm starting to realize that I don't have to know everything. I don't have to figure it out. And I find peace in that. I'm still battling that, but I'm getting much better at it, letting go and not having to know everything. So I've learned that through this change.
Okay, thank you. It kind of, what comes to mind is a memory. I was on a canoe trip, and we came upon this canoe upturned in the river, and the person who I was canoeing with thought that we should take that canoe with us, and I thought that was not a good idea at all, because of, I mean, the rapids were early, but anyway, trying to get into that canoe, I was trying for it to get into it. And every time it started to turn, and I knew it was going to get overwhelmed with water, and that was going to be danger. And finally, I flopped in the canoe, and I said, God is your canoe. I can't do a thing with it. And I just lay down in the canoe, and it went right through the rapids just like it's supposed to. So I think sometimes what you're saying, Sandy, we work so hard to figure it out, and sometimes if we can relax and wait, somehow the canoe navigated those rapids without my assistance. So any other new understandings or maybe viewpoints that people have come to through some of the changes in their lives?
Another one of my dad's quotes was, when life deals you a lemon, what's the best way to make lemonade?
Mm-hmm. You're shaking your head, Wayne. You don't want to make lemonade?
Sometimes it needs a lot of sugar or a lot of honey.
That's true. That's true. And then there was an old lady I knew who said, when you're making something sweet, you always put in a little pinch of salt, because that helps to balance or bring out the sweetness. I'd like to read a little quote from Sue Monk Kidd's book. She says, changes, deep spiritual and psychological changes, started to make themselves known. Those changes took a lot of getting used to. The feeling of adjustment reminded me of the time I'd had my hair cut in a completely new look. Later that day, standing outside a store window, I caught the reflection of a woman. When I raised my arm, she raised hers. It gave me a start. For a split second, I didn't recognize that the woman was me. Emergence is like that. We have to grow to our newness even as we recognize her. She'll no doubt give us many starts. And perhaps you recognize the emergence, or have recognized the emergence of a new self within you. And sometimes we're a little startled by that. And it might be a good startled. I think generally it is. There was a little video that Addie Hoffman, who was on our staff, shared with me, and it's in response to the coronavirus, and I'd like us to see that. Any responses to that little video?
That was really inspiring.
Mm-hmm. I think I recognize some of the words that we've been using to think, to reimagine, to reimage that loss, but what they discovered. Joanne, I think you had a comment.
It was very hopeful. Makes you think that there's purpose for all of this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And hope, when you say that word, hope is very essential in a time of change. And especially when maybe we've lost our sense of meaning, our sense of purpose, our way, to hold on to that hope. Anyone else, a response to the video? I think she used the word healing a couple of times. What healing have you discovered in your life during this time? Oh, Grant.
I discovered just a reconnection with simplicity, with nature, getting back to the basics and prioritizing.
Wait.
I actually discovered how much I enjoyed my daily life, as hectic as it could be. This change makes me appreciate more if I worked a 10-hour day or a 12-hour day or 7 days a week or trying to manipulate through life. Because for me, this change has been very unnerving. So I have a greater appreciation for my actual normal day to day.
Mm-hmm. And we'll hope that normalcy comes back. It might be in a bit of a new way, but however it comes back, may you enjoy that as much and be as grateful for that. I think for myself, I've been able to take a few more walks and just really enjoy nature. I live out in the woods, so I'm very grateful for that. And I think that's just a general slowing down that I've appreciated. Joanne.
I've come to realize how grateful and how lucky we are to live up here, to have enough to eat, to not have to worry about where we're going to sleep or where we're going to get our next meal. I mean, and then you look at all of the people that are hurting in this, like Wayne, and all the people who don't have enough money, and it breaks your heart. And then in some ways I feel very guilty for being able to live up here where we have no neighbors. Everybody on our lane is gone all winter except John and I. So we're the only people around anyway. It really, I don't think I've been so aware, so much aware of how many people in our world are hurting. And especially when they talk about all of the African American and Latino people who are hit so much harder by this. And it makes you realize that, for one thing, to be so grateful for what we have, but also to be more aware of what's really going on in our world. So I'm grateful for all of that.
Mm-hmm. So a greater awareness, and I think a greater, then it sounds like a greater sensitivity and compassion also. I think when we, I do think it has broadened our awareness. There's another little graphic, I'll call it, that Grant's going to put on the screen that I think is one of the consequences of change, or can be one of the consequences of change. Oops.
Is that what you're looking for?
That's what I'm looking for.
Okay.
So, of course, we who live in the Northwoods, I think sometimes we're satisfied with looking at the lakes and the rivers, maybe a creek. I've discovered a beautiful, beautiful creek near where I live that I think, oh my gosh, I've lived here for 70 years and never knew this was here. So it was a wonderful discovery. So if we can look forward to those adventures with hope, with eagerness, to know that change is a process. It takes time, and some changes have their own time. Can we be patient with them? Can we trust them? Can we trust ourselves? Can we trust God as we understand God in the process of change? I want to thank you for participating today. Maybe, Grant, if we can just go back to everyone on the screen. Oh, that's pretty. But I think maybe I'm just going to ask people if they would share an I discovered statement, something that you discovered today. You know, you can just wave your hand and when you're ready to say, I discovered. Ron.
Well, I guess I discovered discovered the power of our technology in order to share ideas with over a distance, which again makes me reflect on our connectiveness as a people and as a global community. In that, you know, there's we all share the same vulnerabilities and hopefully share the concepts of gratitude. And by being able to connect by our technology, it makes us all feel more like one. So I would say that one is all and all is one. That's my discovery.
Thank you. Now, Sister Marla.
I'm just in awe, number one, of the great job you did. And secondly, to sit here and think, I'm looking into 8 different homes. I mean, I see a little corner of each one of our homes, but how that all happens. And we can all see each other, even though we're all facing one direction, we can all see each other both ways. You know, just all these mysteries, they leave me spellbound, you know? And then how you had a nice break in there so that we could get up and move around or take care of whatever in the house needed attention or, you know, whatever. But just, gosh, this is just really pretty awesome what you can do now. There must have been thousands of hours that went into the making of this by whoever put all this kind of equipment together. Yeah, it's really a splendid invention.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Grant.
Thank you, Pat, for putting this all together. And I feel extra privileged because I see your outline in front of me, so I can go back and read some of it. But I keep on going back to that first graphic, the navigator, the survivor, and I can't remember, green, yellow, red. But how I see myself just reflecting on it's not stagnant. It go from one to the other, and a lot of it is influenced externally, but a lot of it is from inside too, that we can look and experience the same thing but have a completely different feelings inside and ways we respond to it with ourselves, with God, with each other.
Joanne, had I seen your Joanne?
Yes, well, I just want to say thank you to you, Pat, and Marla, and Grant for putting this on, because you've given me a whole new perspective of how to look at this thing. So I really appreciate it, and thank you. It has been really nice to have this today. Thanks so much.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it very much also.
Yeah, it's quite the experience. Because right smack in the center is Sister Marla on my screen, who is like, she doesn't like to overemphasize anything, because as I stare over the top of my computer, I see the book that she encouraged me to read, and come to find out she's in the book.
What's that?
Sister Thea Bowman's My
Oh,
Song.
yeah, that's right.
And you talk about a wake-up moment. It's like a slap in the face. It's 10 o'clock on a very late Lenten evening, and my Lenten promise was to read that book. And so like my joy today is that I get to say thank you for getting me to read that book about a wonderful woman and a great, an incredible person, to give us all, for the changes that she went through, were incredible. But I thank you all, and Sister, yes, you said I would be back someday, but I came via the internet, so I'll go there and go fishing with you.
You can still go
So
back.
good for you. Yeah.
Funny you
We didn't know it was going to happen so soon, but this is great.
I'll take it.
All the way down in Indiana, right?
Yes.
Mhm.
I think the other thing that it shows is, as big and vast as this world really is, we're all kind of in the same little boat. There at Holy Family in Woodruff, there's the beautiful bronze image of Jesus sitting on the front of the boat navigating the storm. And I took a picture of that, and I'm glad I did, because it helps us navigate through the storm at times, remind us who's driving.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Wayne. Well, I keep thinking our time's up, and we might just get cut off. So again, thank you. I think one of the things I discovered is that, yeah, who we are does change. Who I am changes. Again, looking at those modes of response and recognizing that change doesn't just happen, that I have some choices in the matter, choices in terms of how I respond, choices in terms of seeing the opportunities. Yes, admitting what might be lost, and also looking at what might be gained. To be reminded that there is an ocean and a sea out there to travel on. So thank you so very, very much. I think we're going to put up the last, we began with a prayer, but maybe Grant, let's just put up the serenity prayer. And often we read the serenity prayer, but it's not the full version of it. So